Hi, Year 8. Welcome to the first of this week's lesson. We're still looking at genetics. Please can you make sure you do this lesson first. So a couple of recall questions for you to do first. So what I'd like to do is I would like you to pause the video and have a go at the questions you can see in front of you. Okay, thanks for doing those. Please can you make sure that you upload copies of all of your answers to the Google Classroom, just so I know that you're doing the work. Okay, I will give you the answers to mark independently. So let's have a look at our answers for this one. What does DNA stand for? So DNA is deoxyribonucleic acid. And when you get to GCSE, you'll look into why it's called that. So what's a gene? A gene is a short section of DNA that carries information for characteristics, or it codes the information for characteristics, you could say. True or false? Guanine is always pairs with adenine. False, it pairs with cytosine. It's one of the base pairs in DNA. And where is the DNA in a cell held? It's held in the nucleus. And why do I have blue eyes but my mum has brown eyes? Okay, that's because both of my parents must have passed on the recessive gene for blue eyes to me, because brown eyes, the gene for brown eyes is dominant, and the gene for blue eyes is recessive. Okay, guys, if you want to mark and correct those, you can pause the video to do that now. Okay, so today we're going to be talking about variation. So what I'd like to do is I'd like you to define the term variation, explain the differences between inherited and environmental variation and give some examples, and draw some simple genetic diagrams to show how characteristics are passed on. So firstly, let's look at dogs. I love dogs. I know lots of you have dogs at home, but dogs all look completely different from one another, all the different breeds of dog. They're all variations on the species. So if you look, some dogs have big floppy ears, some have little pointy up ears, some are really fluffy, some don't have much fluff on them at all, some are quite small, some are much bigger, some look really dopey. Well, to be honest, all of these ones look absolutely adorable. And this all comes from genetic variation, so variation within the genes, which has given the dogs these particular characteristics. And that goes for humans as well. My younger sister's a little bit taller than me. That comes from our genes. We both have brown hair. That comes from our genes. And these are what we call inherited characteristics. So the different characteristics, here we go, I've got some blurb for you here, between individuals of the same species is what is known as variation. So some variation is passed on from parents via genes. Okay, so things like our eye color. So if we put up here, so things like eye color, hair color, height, in some cases weight, shoe size, skin tone. Okay, so that's what's called inherited variation, and some is what's known as environmental variation. So variation that changes because of our environment. So, for example, hair length. You know, I can go home and I can cut my hair to different lengths. Hair color as well can also be an environmental variation, because it's something that we could do. Let's have a look. What else have we got on here? Thinking about what else could be. Weight could be environmental, you know, whether or not you have enough food, for example, and actually height could be as well, because that could be linked into having enough food. So it's really important that you understand the differences between environmental variation and inherited variation. So remember, inherited variation comes via our genes, not the genes that we wear. G genes, not J genes. And environmental, that comes from the environment, so our surroundings. We've got some examples here. Humans, dogs, and goldfish are examples of different species, and they each have their own characteristics. For example, dogs don't have tails. Dogs have tails, humans don't. Dogs have fur, but goldfish have scales. And individual members of a species also have different characteristics. Humans, as we already said, they have different colour eyes. Dogs have different length tails. But this is really important. It means that no two members of a species is identical. Okay, I know we have identical twins, but actually, environmental factors can affect identical twins. For example, if one of the twins didn't get as much nutrition in the uterus, it might be that twin might be smaller. We had a couple of identical twins all about 10 years ago in the school, and one of them was markedly taller than the other. And that would have been down to environmental factors. Everything else about them was identical. Okay, let's move on. So let's have a look over here. I just want to talk about Darwin's finches for a moment. We're going to look at evolution in another topic. But one of the ways which Charles Darwin, I'm just going to put Charles Darwin, one of the reasons, or one of the ways he came up with his theory of evolution was looking at species, or looking at variations of finches on different islands, in a group of islands called the Galapagos. And if you look here, Darwin's finches, they're all the same species of bird, but they have remarkably different beaks, and that's due to that's due to the type of food they eat. The type of food they ate, or that was available on the island they lived, gave rise to different shaped beaks. So we see this variation within the species, and this is a genetic variation because it's passed on through each different species of finch. I can't spell today. Genetic. So it's a genetic variation. Okay, so it's an inherited characteristic, and we'll go into a bit more detail about Charles Darwin and his finches when we look at evolution. Okay, let's go back to dogs. And what we wanted to do is now we're just going to have a look at a video. And actually, variation can be very, very useful. And it's something that humans, especially in dogs, have bred. So let's have a little look at the video.
In our puppy blog, we have in the region of 30 puppies. They're different in terms of their behavior and temperament, and all of them are unique, just like we are. My name's Matthew Boston. I'm head of the breeding program here at Guide Dogs, and my puppy blogs overseeing the breeding of over 1,300 puppies a year. Breeding is essential, really, for producing a really excellent quality guide dog. We need to be able to produce a range of dogs, a range of different temperaments and behaviours, probably physical size and even colours. So variation for me is all those differences, naming those very special traits that are really important for value. So these are both Labrador trainers in the same litter, so they're a brother and sister, and maybe you can see very different as well. Just like all human family brothers and sisters that might be described as twins. Genetics, the way it works is that we all inherit from our genes from our mums and dads, as to our dogs, and the brother is the same genes. The coat colour in a slightly different way for these particular two individuals. Lots of top executives have stress balls on their desk to squeeze one of the individual stress and have a colour with a puppy.
Okay, so let's have a little chat about variation. So what they've done here, when they are breeding dogs to become guide dogs, they are looking for. Let me get my pen. They are looking for specific characteristics. And what they'll do is they'll look for the parents which have those characteristics, and they'll breed those together in the hope that the offspring will have those characteristics as well. Because only very particular dogs with very particular temperaments can be guide dogs. So actually, variation can be really useful. Other examples of breeding, and I'll use dogs as an example again for breeding particular temperaments or breeding particular qualities in a dog, comes with sheepdogs as well. So basically, you would breed, if you had a very good sheepdog, you might well breed that with another very good sheepdog to produce young that could be used for rounding up sheep later on. Okay, so there's loads of uses that they for variation. Okay, so what I'd like you to do now is I'd like you to pause the video and answer the questions answer these 5 questions on the attached sheet. So pause the video and we'll come to the answers in a moment. Okay, so what is variation? They're the differences in characteristics between individuals of the same species. Okay, that's the definition. The two types of variation, there's inherited or environmental. Eye colour is an inherited or genetic variation. And scars, they are environmental. You don't get scars from your parents. And why is variation so important? Well, it helps the species to survive. Those finches that we looked at earlier, if they didn't have those different beaks, they wouldn't be able to eat the food on the particular island. So it is really important that variation helps species to survive. So if you want to pause your video and mark and correct those. Okay, so we're going to have a look at some genetic diagrams. We touched on these last lesson, but we're going to go along with basically the theme of Harry Potter. So let's have a little think about this. So in the magic community, the magic gene is recessive. So it is a recessive gene. So we're going to represent the magic gene as small m. And oh, sorry, I can see I've made a little error there. So small m is the recessive, which must mean the Muggle gene, which we're going to represent as big M, is dominant. So if you have if a witch or a wizard has a dominant Muggle gene, they're not going to have magic powers. Okay, so let's just have a look at one of the families. So let's look at the Malfoys first. So the Malfoys are considered pure blood families. Yeah. So you've got Lucius there, and you've got Narcissa Malfoy there. Not the right picture. Let me get rid of those diagrams that I've got on there. And basically, they're a pure blood family. So all of their ancestors have two of the recessive magic genes. Okay, so we've got two MM. We've got MM there. We've got MM there, which means Draco's going to have MM. So they are pure blood wizards. Let's have a little look at our next example. So let's have a look at the Potters. So the Potters again, both Harry's parents, were witches and wizards, so they must have had the small recessive gene as well, which means Harry did as well. So they passed those magical abilities on to Harry. Now let's have a look at Hermione, because she's a bit of a special case because her parents are Muggles. Oh, wrong one. Come down to Hermione. We'll come back to him in a minute. Okay, so here we go. So we know that Hermione is a powerful witch, yeah? So her parents were Muggles, so they must have had the Muggle gene, which is big M. Okay, both of them must have had it because they were both Muggles. However, Hermione she's a witch, so she must be have two recessive genes. So both her parents must have had the recessive gene in there, in order to give her those properties to make her magic. And let's have a look at the last one. Let's have a look at Tom Riddle, okay, the old Voldemort himself. So he's a half-blood. So his mother was a witch. Let me just make a little note here. So here we go. His mum. So his mother was a witch, and his father was a Muggle. So his father had the Muggle gene, but he must have had a magic gene as well in order to pass it on to Tom. So Tom has two genes so that he can have the magic powers as well, and the alleles. So let's have a look at how a Punnett square would work on this, which is that diagram that we looked at last time. So if we go down and we look at Hermione again, we look at her family. So here we go. The Granger's children have a 1 in 4 chance of getting M alleles. So if we have a look here, so there's Mr. Granger and Mrs. Granger. We've already established that they must have a Muggle gene, but they must also both have a magic gene in order to give Hermione her magic. So let's have a look. So I just changed my colour there because that's blue. That's not going to show up. There we go. Okay, so this child here, this would be Hermione. So Hermione has two magic genes. If we look at the rest of the children, so this particular child here would get the Muggle gene from dad and the magic gene from mum. And then here, this child here would get the Muggle gene from mum and the magic gene from dad. And this child here would have two Muggle genes. So there's no chance of this child passing on the magic gene to anyone. And that's how these work. So we can say there's a 25% chance, a 1 in 4 chance of two Muggle parents producing a magic child, and 50% chance of their children holding the magic gene, and there's a 25% chance of one of their children not holding a gene at all and just being a complete just a Muggle. Okay, so hopefully that's been helpful. What I'd like you to do now is have a go at the rest of the questions on the sheet. And what I'll do is I'll upload pause of this video, and then when you're done, come back to it and I will give you the answers afterwards. Okay, so if you want to pause the video now. Okay, so here's your answers to the other questions that are on the sheet. So if you would like to mark that and correct anything you need to, don't forget to upload a copy of it to the task just so that I can see that you have completed the work. And then once you've done that, you can move on and do the second lesson, which is another lesson about different types of variation. Okay, guys, thanks a lot.